Ford realizes that EVs are going to just crush, ultimately, they're going to crush gasoline prices and gasoline consumption and ethanol, as we just mentioned. And they're thinking that what's going to happen is it will cause the price of gasoline to collapse as well. And as gasoline becomes very inexpensive to use, that there will be some models of trucks that will continue to use gasoline or diesel. And they think the cutoff is going to be at the F-150 pickup. All sedans and the F-150 pickups are going to be electric. Anything larger than a 150, a 250, 350, the diesel powered trucks will continue to be gasoline powered. That's just Ford's view of the world, but I thought that's kind of interesting. And the other thing they're really pushing is what they call pre-driving. And I said, okay, what's pre-driving? And he said, they understand that electric cars will be, you'll be able to manage it and run your electric car from your smartphone. And so he said they're really pushing this as a benefit to EVs. And he said, what they will do then is you get your smartphone and you know that every day from Monday through Friday, you leave at 7:30 to drive to your office. So what the pre-driving does is it allows you to set it up, to schedule it where your car will cool itself down while it's still plugged in, and it cools itself down. So, you know, when you go get in your car, it's not 92 degrees, it's 74 degrees, and the fan is running at a medium speed, yada, yada, yada. Because then when you unplug, it doesn't take as much energy to maintain a temperature as it does to bring a temperature down or up from a freezing temperature or boiling hot temperature. And you're doing that while you're plugged in, and that increases your range. Plus your car is a lot more comfortable when you go get in it. And I thought, okay, they're thinking it through. That's a really good idea. And so it'll be interesting to see how on point Ford is in their beliefs about the break between the EVs and the gas-powered trucks and everything else. And the other thing I wanted to mention no, it's going to happen within a few years. And you know, I think the transition to EVs may be like some of these other transitions, if I can pronounce it right, where it happens slowly then all at once. And I think once you get to a certain level of EV penetration in the automobile industry, people are just going to start converting, especially when they realize, oh, okay, you know what, I can set my car to a certain temperature at certain days of the week, so it's ready to go as soon as I step in there. And to me, that would be a benefit, an obvious benefit for EVs. Plus, they're just 5 times as efficient as gasoline-powered cars to move the thing forward. But the other thing I wanted to mention while we were driving through Wisconsin, and we were in this little bitty town, and there's this old, you know, car repair shop, maintenance shop on the side of the road, and we drove by, and on their sign, it said, free oil changes on all Tesla cars. And I thought, okay, they got it. See, they already understand this little bitty town in Wisconsin that, you know, you don't need all that stuff for EVs. And I thought, okay, this is good. You know, that means there's progress being made even in these small areas. So at any rate, so I think, Randy, you set up and ready to go?
I am, although, okay. Is that what everybody at home is saying?
You just, sometimes I just share your screen, so we had it up, but we're there.
Now it says it's not in the meeting.
Oh. Did you? Okay.
Okay, I'll go ahead with the intro while you're doing that.
Still showing?
Okay, so today's presenter is Randy Boyes, Strategy and Technology Manager for Oncor Electric Delivery. And by the way, Randy, as far as the presentation goes, are you good with questions during the presentation?
I
or-
am good with questions during the presentation.
All right,
And I'm also good with, I had to make a conscious decision. I am not here as a Oncor representative today, or some of the things I've written here
Okay.
wouldn't be okay.
all right.
I'm not here as a Parks and Wildlife Texas Master Naturalist here today, although, so I can talk about whatever I want, but I'll also answer questions from any of those three hats.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so questions are open during the presentation for any of us. The presentation today is Texas 2036, the human biome from an energy perspective. And, I will be interested to understand how you connect a biome with human energy perspective, because a biome in my mind is a large, I don't know, forest or tundra or whatever, with the various animals and plants, flora and fauna in those areas. So,
Exactly right.
okay, so it'll be
Yeah,
interesting to see how you made that into the human energy perspective. So,
I'm trying to join.
about the presentation, recasting his recent Texas Parks and Wildlife Master Naturalist Term project, Randy will take a look at humans as energy consumers. Well, we are big energy consumers in our Texas ecosystem, both today and per base case predictions of climate change for North Texas, as stated by the Texas Climatologist, focusing on that bicentennial year, 2036. The briefing will emphasize potential impacts on generation sources, the grid, and related industries. Randy is currently Strategy and Technology Manager at Oncor Electric Delivery. Should be CEO, shouldn't he? Is a system engineer with 40 years of electronics and man-machine interface R&D experience and 5 years in health sciences R&D. Randy's interest in environmental stewardship align well with some ancillary assignments within Oncor, such as leading engagements with EarthX, Dallas College's Sustainability Office, and other Oncor Grid Edge public forums. Randy has authored papers in distributed energy management, microgrids, and statistics, among many others. He is an avid participant in anything involving the outdoors. Hey, I am too. That works out. And is active in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Randy is an individual volunteer of the year, Keep Texas Beautiful awardee, and a recently certified Texas Parks and Wildlife Master Naturalist, among other volunteer and professional awards. So with all that, I will turn over Randy and make sure your microphone is on and working. It should be a green light there if it's on. Oh, let's see. No, I think it's on the top. There. Okay, now you're on. Okay, so with all that, I will turn it over to Randy, and so we all welcome him here today. Thank you.
Hey, and I was in the meeting
And then I got kicked out.
and I get kicked out for some reason. I think I'm connecting back in.
This meeting is being recorded.
Then you should be able to. You still co-host?
I don't need to be, but
Okay.
okay,
Well,
whatever.
to share your presentation.
Oh, you're right, it's not letting me share.
Okay, hold on, so I will.
So it doesn't allow it to window.
Oh, okay. Choose what to share, so window, and then is it one of those?
We'll get to that later.
Why don't you cancel for now? Mm. Back to this one.
Sure.
Wait, what?
You can join.
No, I don't want to join audio.
Yeah, okay, so go back to the share screen. And then. window. So you don't see your presentation?
Because I'm in,
Oh.
because it's in slideshow mode. It
Okay.
won't show until I start running it.
Okay,
But the entire screen isn't. Either.
you can't,
Oh, there-
okay.
there it
those, yeah.
We're getting there.
Okay. So now-
Just be careful. Oh, hallelujah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
After that slight delay, my apologies.
We're good.
Just so that you don't go away without getting something interesting today, I brought a version of this briefing to my recent term project. We had to do briefings for the candidates who were going through, and the permanent members. And being a outdoorsy and environmental science and biology and rocks and minerals and this, that, and the other, I started with this as my cover slide. It has nothing to do with anything that we'll be doing afterwards, but these are all indeed Texas and North Texas minerals. My main passion when I'm outdoors is, you know, digging my nose into the rocks. And it was fun, actually, how many times, both in my prior professions with defense electronics and in what I've been doing with Oncor since then, you know, the things that I know about one of my passions actually comes to and with the indeed with the master naturalist. So with the exception of topaz, you can't find here, but since it's a state gem, I had to put in there, and the fancy cut that's called the Texas cut, so you can see the star in the background. And then the other is the state rock is down here at Cabochon in the middle. It's a granite with these two little blue phoenix crysts in it called lanite. You might be able to guess that it comes from Llano, Texas, right next to Baby's Head Cemetery. The town of Baby's Head doesn't exist anymore, but the Baby's Head Cemetery does. So anyways, that was my get on the stage. Let's talk about things actually more relevant. Guess there's a little bit of delay here. Curious.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for this one.
Oh, wait, it's just a big delay.
Okay.
Can you talk louder, please?
Is my microphone on, or am I only in the room?
I'm online and I can't hear you very well.
Have any adjustment besides on and off? I can use that.
Okay, see if this works better.
Is this better?
Say something again.
Hello, is this any better?
Not really.
It sounds like he's coming from a different microphone. It's not picking up his direct mic.
Except for I have two of them.
Maybe it's the computer.
I didn't use audio on mine. I specifically did
Yeah.
not join with audio on that because I figured 3 mics would be a little too much.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there a volume control on the mixer?
Yeah, it's all the way up.
I can speak loudly. Okay. Does that help the folks at home?
Yes, thank you. That's better. Thank you.
Okay, and then my apologies to the folks in the room.
No, there you go.
Okay.
That's good.
Right. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't clear, for example, this briefing with the master naturalist, so I'm not here as a master naturalist. I am, however, recasting a term project, and I've modified it a little bit for the folks here. I would have to be in a shirt. I would have to have gotten Parks and Wildlife pre-approval, badge, this, that, and the other. I'm also not here as an Oncor representative, but I am more than happy to speak as an Oncor employee. There are indeed 3 or 4 slides in here with the Oncor logos on them that have been cleared for public release that I didn't have to go through, et cetera. And that's, both of those organizations care about, well, you know, you can't go out in public and offer an opinion about Parks and Wildlife or about Oncor. Well, frankly, I don't believe anything in here is an opinion. But since some of those organizations might, I'm going to throw that caveat up here first. More than happy to dance around my assertions of facts and connections I make in this, that, and the other, whether they're opinions, I guess, whatever. North Texas Renewable Energy Group. I've always loved my interactions with this group because there are so many things that you already know or that you are concerned about, that even when I'm going to talk about things that are related to environmental science, you might not think of yourself as environmental scientists, but you have a grounding in some of the fundamentals of energy and the impacts of what happens with different energy types, how that relates to policy, how that relates to impacts on the environment or society, et cetera. I had a fun time, you know, seeing how far into this briefing I could bring 35 or 40 naturalists who were in the room with me when I was trying to talk about energy. So I know I'm good with this group on that. That said, my intent is not to educate you in environmental science. There's a couple of threads in here that might make some ahas, that as you're trying to say the same things you already know and say or are concerned about when you have discussions with others, there's just a couple more hooks to hang things on. And I find it useful because, you know, knowing your audience, knowing what they react to, knowing the different levers you can throw when you're trying to get out there and be assertive in something, is you can't have too many arrows in your quiver. And I have asked for the new slide. I'm going to wait until it shows up before I hit too many more buttons.
Those fancy transitions.
No, oh, I haven't even gotten to those yet. That could be a problem. Last time, so last time, the only other time I used most of the material in this was last month in the term projects. And for the first time, I was kind of like, well, it's short, and these guys are visual, they don't want to hear about energy, so let me do some fancy transition. I got to the first one, and I got this mix on the slide of stuff I couldn't talk to. It just didn't do the transitions right at all. I wasn't on my computer, I was on someone else's. So let's see. The last time we did this, we went forward another and then backwards.
Yeah.
Just wait some more. No, wait, there it is. Okay. A little bit about environmental science. So the first thing you have to figure out all of the variables that are involved before you start talking about how those things interact. And so we went through geology, hydrography, chemistry, climate, the Blackland Prairie. I happen to be a member of what's called the Blackland Prairie chapter of the Texas Master Naturalist. Basically, it's a slave labor group run by the Texas Parks and Wildlife. We want to go out there and do things. They got lots of things for us to do. The Blackland Prairie, you want to, as a tangent, I'm sorry. This isn't my 5th or 6th already. You're going to get a lot more. There are 2 large swaths of the gumbo black clay that we're familiar with here, unless you're in that strip in between the 2 of them that runs through the mid-cities area where it gets a little bit sandier again, and then gets back into the gumbo on the other side. They run from basically southern Oklahoma down almost to Austin, and then there's a smaller kind of curve-shaped thing a little bit further to the east before you just get into the younger marl gunk that's ground that used to be seabed from there all the way to the Gulf Coast. That's the Blackland Prairie. It was originally, I think, the area that it geographically defines about 12.5 million acres. There is less than 7,000 or 8,000 acres of it left that is still the native Blackland Prairie. That's less than I think it's less than 1/10 of 1% of the original Blackland Prairie. 2 of those, the Climber Meadow, maybe I think 1,000 acres, and then Leland on the south end of Lake Louisville is like 4,000 or 5,000 acres. Kind of old pieces of what all the buffalo used to do is they ran through here, beat up the shallow but very fertile ground. The fires that would come through there, burn everything every few years, turned it into some wonderful farm material as long as you only used it once. And so, you know, all the farming came in. Texas, by the way, is so far over the top in terms of the private ownership of property. I mean, if it hadn't been for Big Bend, we'd be like 99%. It's like 94% of the state is privately owned. And so it's really hard to enforce environmental concerns or do preservation, except for obviously by working with private landowners. That's all neither here nor there, I guess. Oh, that's right. I'm supposed to be yelling. Are the folks at home hearing me enough to follow?
I
Maybe.
guess I'm still, it's not, still not might be picking up from that one, but. you might-
Was this one any better? Hello, hello.
You just have to use that one.
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
So we learned about the history of what made this particular part of the environment, and the Blackland Prairie notwithstanding. You may not be from that. You may be from West Texas or East Texas or the Hill Country, the Escarpment, whatever. Bottom line is we live in a biome that's defined by the physical assets that are under it. Each area has what it's called a carrying capacity for how much life it can sustain and which types of plants and animals, et cetera, exist in the area. You've probably heard of the thing called the food chain, and what you think of is kind of, oh, you know, bunnies at the bottom and wolves or tigers or whatever at the top. And that characterization is fine. There's what we call producers at the bottom, and those are the ones that are directly harvesting the raw energy in the environment, which is sun. That's where all the energy that goes up the food chain comes from. So you've got one production level, and then you've got a number of consumer levels. And when they talk about the food chain, it's usually how many consumers there are of that primary production piece. And so each of those levels is what's called the trophic level. And so, and we're not, I promise, I'm not going to teach you all about environmental science. I'll take it off of this, I think, after this, back to energy. Humans are not, you know, carnivores are not necessarily apex animals. We are apex animals for completely different reasons, and that's what's going on in our cerebellum and what we've done to master the rest of the environment. But as a animal or a plant in the environment, we'd be somewhere here in the middle. If we were, you know, if you, about another rule of thumb, you can do precise measurements in each different biome for how much energy is transferred between the layers. But rule of thumb, you're only going to get about 10% energy transfer from each layer that you go up that food chain. And again, we're starting just at the solar energy that came in, the 4.7 watt hours per square meter per day. That area can be converted into energy that then is available to the plants and animals further up the chain. If you were a human in that food chain that ate a lot of burgers, you'd be a little bit higher on that kind of trophic level mix than somebody who's what they call an endothermic vegetarian. There are plenty of vegetarians that aren't endotherms, and So, you know, your lizard consumes an awful lot less, even though it's a mid-level animal than you would as a rabbit or a human. So bottom line is, regardless of whether you're at a level 2 or a level 2.5 or something like that as a human, you're consuming for homeostasis, and homeostasis means doing all the things you like to do. Eat and sleep and, you know, process your food and reproduce and this and that and the other requires that, let's call it 2,000 calories a day that we all read on the side of the cereal box or whatever. Let's go back then from that 2,000 calories, which is being derived from this food chain at whatever level that we're at. And we're going to move that over into, these are all just direct conversions. That's 27 watt hours, 8 BTUs, British thermal units. I'm converting it here because once we get into the energy part of the discussion, the way the world generally thinks about, you know, how much of what type of energy is being produced, how is society or industry or whatever using it, nobody ever talks in calories. We're going to talk BTUs mostly as we get to the rest of it. There's some scary things going on in there. That basically says, you know, hopefully not all of you are using incandescent bulbs at home except for in specialty places. So saying 40 watt bulb and saying 100 watt bulb doesn't mean, at least I don't have any juniors in here. I went through a thing with not my current intern, but my prior intern, and I mentioned in passing blue light special. You know, we waited politely until I got to the end of it. And it's like, you know, what's the blue light special? And I was like, oh, you know, when they have the physically move the thing out there and they have the arm and you can see the blue light at the Kmart, you know, saying that there's a sale. He's like, no, what's a Kmart? That's like, oh my God. So bottom line is, you know, I was gonna say before I move down here, if you hadn't stopped and dwelled on that number, that's basically saying that for the equivalent of you having a 40 watt, try to read by a 40 watt light bulb, it's, you know, it's not enough, right? But let's talk about a 40 watt light bulb. For the energy that that's on for half an hour is the amount of energy that you need to exist as a human being, maintaining, and that's even our fairly high energy demanding endothermic type of reactions that we carry as mammals going on, is the same as that light bulb for half an hour. Or let's go to the 100 watt light bulb, you know, for 15 minutes now, not even. So as we start talking about us as consumers, keep some of these pain points in mind, because, you know, the way we use energy and the way that other animals use energy don't have an awful lot to do with each other. We don't just eat those 8 BTUs equivalent or soak it up from, you know, the sun, or eat enough grass, or, you know, eat the bunnies or whatever to get that and then get our 2,000 calories. We raise the salads and cows and industrial scale agriculture. We've got money in plastic and exchange systems. We got refrigerators to keep things in. We're smart enough to, you know, stay healthy and learn to do more things the next time around. So the bottom line is, we've left that. We've used energy to completely alter what it means to be a human being. How much do we actually consume per day? 849,000 plus BTUs a day per person. So, and these are just some little, you know, if we consider ourselves, we cannot support, there is not enough energy at a normal trophic level to move. Very few places in the world where you have 4 trophic levels, you know, where basically carnivores are eating carnivores, and otherwise, you know, the range that those animals need to have, hundreds of square miles of range, you know, to be able to move and find enough of those other carnivores to eat. You don't get to a 4th level, in the exception of very rare environments. A 5th level, which is basically what we're talking about here for, you know, that's the thing is, you know, normally in some rare instances you can get to a 4th. Well, what we've said is basically humans are over here. We have redefined what it means to be an animal in the environment and all the impacts thereof. Just as a little aside, got back to my minerals and showed how the Mohs scale, where you start thinking about hardness 1 through 10, the difference between 9 and 10 is the same as the difference between 4 and 5. Just superimposed. So does that really mean that we're out there eating the equivalent of the growth of grass of 26 acres of grass or food stock or whatever that's in an area every day? Technically, yes, but we don't do it by chewing 26 acres worth of growth every day. Yes, thank you. Here's where we pause for the next slide. I guess I have all sorts of little fun facts I can throw out while things are transitioning. Electric vehicles, bottled water versus tap water. Do you think that the amount of distance that you can go down the road, and the car I drove here today, the difference between the energy in taking my water from the tap as opposed to using a standard 12-ounce bottle of water, that the difference in the distance I could go would be measured in feet, meters, which unit is closest? Feet, meters, kilometers, or miles? Kilometers. About 0.6 of a mile, about a kilometer. You can get is the difference of if you filled up your tap water, if you could harvest the energy, if you didn't, now unfortunately all you did is not use the bottled water, so it's not like you can take it to the bank and go put that in your vehicle as your energy. But as the impact at a system level, every one of those bottled waters is removing, back to our 800,000 BTUs a day, is removing the energy it would take for you to move that vehicle down the road 0.6 of a mile. So how do we come up with that other 99.995% of the energy that we threw off as not just hanging out in the environment and hoping that we're not freezing to death or baking, or getting eaten by one of those actual apex predators? We make energy, we alter the equation by manipulating energy. We liberate it from latent sources, we capture it from kinetic sources, in the process of doing so, releasing tons of excess heat, greenhouse gases, other byproducts, etc. That's the issue. There's, I guess, another fun fact I could go through is what the efficiency is, and this chart's trying to show it. In some regard, I said we saw 840,000 BTUs go into the system for me each day. We didn't really say how much of it was converted to a product, as opposed to one of these waste gases or heat, et cetera, that I didn't want. But it's not pretty. And here's one of the pictures. There are, I could do an entire briefing on just going from the first one of these Sankey diagrams. He was a researcher that worked for Livermore, and they continue pushing them out, although as a general flow in, flow out way of describing things, it's a great graphing process. So you've got all your solar and your wind and nuclear and hydropower, wood, it's geothermal, natural gas, coal, biomass, and petroleum products that bring energy into the system, some of which is converted into another form of transmissible energy through electricity. It has, as that happens, its waste product component of it. These others generally move forward to their consumption if they weren't either shunted up to electricity. They do indeed become the products that are consumed, some of which then industrial and transportation have their own waste trails as well. So you basically have wasted energy versus the actual energy services. And you can see that going back to that 840,000 BTUs, most of it's lost. Most of it's lost out somewhere in something we didn't want to do. But it was just a byproduct of the way we chose our energy types and chose our way of living. Yes. Well, yes, it is thermodynamics. The question is it the system that we need as opposed to the system that we have? So yes, you could still potentially have the same energy consumption without having the same energy
Just
byproducts.
generate solar energy instead of using steam to spin a turbine to.
Exactly, yes. And then in terms of where's all this energy going, you saw it over here. This is just a different way of depicting where are those things going in. I don't know which of these is more surprising to you, but you know, the commercial and residential, you have some of it that's a dominant piece of it, that's the HVAC types of processes, but they're not exclusive, especially once you get into the commercial sides of things. Industrial, you know, there's, boy, I could just go into all sorts of, you know, gosh, why it makes so much sense to recycle aluminum. I mean, like, it takes so much energy to make that stuff out of bauxite. But then you've also got all sorts of other issues in terms of, you know, lots of industrial processes require heating. There's some really neat stuff coming online in terms of the inductive heating systems as opposed to just, you know, furnaces and boilers to do industrial heating that are getting more and more cost effective. Now, if I could just put a tax on, oh, well, by the way, you know, if you use that type of fuel, I'm gonna make you incented not to, or tax you, or incent you, or whatever, to go away from the typical, we do heating this way. But that's the same thing that goes on in transportation. You know, it's cheap right now to go out and buy that gas, so what's my incentive to pick another one other than they tell me I gotta do it out of the goodness of my heart and my pocketbook? Well, luckily, we're getting close to cost parity on the electric transportation, but it's not quite there in most domains yet. We talked about oh, there would still be gas in the larger trucks. That's nonsense. Now hydrogen, I can believe, you know, so fuel cells for heavy vehicle transport as opposed to electric batteries, maybe, but the hydrogen economy, all the infrastructure that's required, the energy that's required to generate hydrogen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could believe that this is going to happen, but there's so much momentum in front of it on battery-based stuff. So what it's going to look like in 2040, 2050 in terms of whether you see a hydrogen, whether you see ammonia storage of a hydrogen economy, what sort of inefficiencies we can take because of the energy that might be available from renewable sources to prime that system in ways that aren't viable today. Hydrogen, yes. Continue going with cars. Good luck for it. With heavy vehicles. Bottom line is transportation is ripe for a transition to electrification. It's a little bit harder in some of these other domains for different reasons, but not impossible.
A lot of the industrial is actually a feedstock, right, that makes the plastic. I mean, I think
Yes.
that's.
Oh, yes.
So that's hard to.
No, and you have that, I mean, natural gas
I mean,
is
unless you
used
can
to make.
recycle the plastic.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, this natural gas is not going into transportation alone. This petroleum is not going into transportation alone.
It's
You've
not
got-
the way
yeah.
we normally think of energy.
Matter of fact, look at it, it's between the two of those, in terms of industrial processes, those equal the amount that's going into transportation. And notice the tiny little bit of biofuels that's hitting the transportation right now. We heard that it's important to those Midwest farmers. If you're the guy with that piece of property, oh my gosh, if you want to get into autonomous vehicles, what's going on in the farming world, and including electric vehicles, they're so far ahead. I mean, what they can do with those buildings on wheels that are doing in the agriculture for them right now, all GPS linked and plucking weeds out and putting the spray down and harvesting and thinning, and it's just sort of like amazing stuff going on. So bottom line is we got a bunch of electricity flowing around. If you are interested, there's a really good read in terms of if you look at every 10 years, how that mix has changed in the United States, and also the projections of what would have to happen to meet various climate goals or economic goals, et cetera. That's another whole briefing I could do. And I started thinking that was the one I was gonna do. And there's a hint of it here, but go out to the Department of Energy, you could look at a lot of that stuff elsewhere. Okay, so as part of that, oh, this is where I get to do more fun wells. Okay, so while we wait for the next slide, how many oil wells have been chopped into? Oh, no, don't hit me. It'll come.
I think, okay.
How many oil wells are there in the United States? How many oil wells have been drilled in the United States?
100 million. What's the rig count usually about 1,000 going all the time? How long does it take to drill an oil well? I don't know.
Okay. It's somewhere around 3 million. And by the way, they don't know because they weren't required to keep records until the 80s. And by the way, a lot of the groups that kept the records aren't in business. And they, they were self-policing, so even though the records had to be there, the federal government doesn't own them. How many of those are in Texas?
I mean,
No.
About half. About 1.5 million holes have been punched in Texas. Now, if you ask the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality, TCEQ, which actually the question here should be directed at the Railroad Commission because they own everything related to oil and gas. How many oil wells aren't capped and are an issue in Texas?
450,000.
They're off by more than one of the magnitude. Oh, no, wrong direction.
Are capped or not?
Are not capped and are an issue, or are capped insufficiently and are a problem environment.
Most of them.
No, according to those two organizations, the count is 28,000. And they actually are proud that they've made it up to almost 10,000 of them that have been remediated since the program has started.
that's all. I'm surprised it's that few.
Well, that's their report.
How many holes have been punched? We don't really know who they are.
That's.
Almost all.
Yeah, because
The vast majority.
Right.
Okay.
Those are
Okay.
Same.
No, it's not the same. We're
It's
doing
not the same?
transmissions here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so this part at the bottom just appeared.
Okay.
So again, we became kind of a different definition of the apex animal solely by our manipulation of energy, which, you could say, well, solely because we've got a cerebellum, et cetera. But bottom line is the impact that we made on the environment came mostly from our control of energy and what we started doing with it. You could just say, hey, what do you know? I can live in Nome. Or I can live in house. Yes, can you imagine it without air conditioning? Think about it. So along the lines, yeah, you might have thought that there were some questionable land, water, and air use practices. But it raised our standard of living. It pushed us into every corner of every environment. It did a lot more than just provide food and shelter. However, if I remember, we just went through the anniversary. What was the first Earth Day?
Oh, 1970.
1970. We had met the enemy and they are us.
Yeah, that was in the 10th grade.
Yeah, that's still at Pogo campaign, the pre-EPA. EPA hadn't yet been founded. It was a year or two later after.
Met the enemy and he is us.
Yeah, absolutely great. First notice on a local level. Hey, the river's on fire. This is normal. 50 years later, fast forward, 53 years later, now we're sort of like, hey, the Earth's on fire. So now we're having to deal with the repercussions of being the master of that energy and the type of energy choices we make. Next transition. Oh, pop.
I know.
Surprise. I was trying to think of my next fun fact. So we can alter the carrying capacity of any biome now. We can move into niche environments that you never would have thought humans would be in. Energy, from an energy perspective, you can say it is fundamental to everything it means to be a human being. And I will refer you to two wonderful minds on this. One was Mr. Buckminster Fullerene, Richard Small, Nobel laureate. It's the C60, is it molecule? I think it is. He, after getting his Nobel, went on a crusade for the rest of his life that was basically looking at human quality of life. That he did one presentation, I cited down here, and we'll be able to post stuff later, but I think it was 2005 presentation to the United Nations Commission on Equity or something like that. And he put forward his 10 challenges to humanity. And it was an ordered list that said, unless we can fix this one, we can't fix the next one. These are the 10 things that we need to fix, all the way up through, education, democracy, this, that, and the other. Number one is energy. If you cannot get clean, low-cost energy to a biome, to the environment, to the humans that live there, you cannot do fully the next handful of things. Water was number 3. I'm trying to think what 2 was, and I don't think it was food. So what would go in between here? And minor, I don't remember. But anyways, it's a wonderful think, because if you read the details, he goes into lots of, well, wait a minute, why did this one follow that one? You go into these really just wonderful reflections of his mind of how it was that he says, yeah, you want to talk about this, but you're really talking about that. The second mine I was going to mention, we have right here in Texas, at least we got him back from France a year or 2 ago, where he went to be the CTO invitation, have the largest energy company in the world invite a professor to come be their CTO for a 12-month period, just because. And this is Michael Weber down at UT. He actually speaks on the same Smalley list at an awful lot of his public briefings, so you can go and look at some of the work that he's done to kind of keep it relevant another 20 years, 30 years later. Not 30 years, 20 years later. Okay, next. Oh, wait, don't press again. It transitioned. It's getting tricky now.
Okay.
All right, looks like the same chart. Uh-oh, did you press it twice?
No.
Okay. Yes, it did.
Okay. You want me to go back?
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay, we gotta wait.
You got some other fun
Computing
fact.
engineer or something.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another fun fact. How would you use a computer as an energy storage device? Heat? Nope. Nope. I've been dropping. No. Okay. Think about how large of an energy consuming enterprise the data centers are. Absolutely huge things that are going on. As they're getting requests to process stuff that's coming in on that data stream.
I'll hook them all up together. And
No. No. Pre-compute. There's millions of answers for which parts of the answer could have been predicted in advance. So the idea that you actually just start organizing the transitions that they're routinely asked to do as pre-computed quanta, which are then accessed on the call, we put it back together as those building blocks, maybe with a couple of parameters that were unique to this particular query, is indeed a huge potential. It's basically a battery. It's a fun, okay.
And we do that as organisms all the time. We have learned things we know how to do. We don't have to learn in real time. We already know how to do it. So we don't have to recompute how to do them.
Cerebellums, or not your cerebellum,
It's our reflexes.
yeah, I'm trying to think, it's the cerebellum, not the cortex, the piece on the back of your brain, which is where all your motor skills and kind of rote behaviors and immediately perceived collections of perceptions that don't get processed. the
Look at
same
how much
way.
energy a toddler has to use trying to move
Yeah.
versus an older kid. Look.
Okay, so we made it backwards. Looks like the same charts that we were on before, but it actually was one last transition that allowed us to talk about not just the control of the energy, but I've noticed that the Sankey diagram has changed. So instead of just looking at the flow of energy in and energy out and the waste flow, I'm now talking specifically about one of those nasty things that happen. And that's carbon dioxide, or it's not really just carbon dioxide. You'll see in the references for climate change, CO2e, so equivalent. And there are certain gases, there are certain other products that have a similar impact on atmospheric warming, but aren't specifically carbon derivatives. And so, you know, if you look at it, methane is a biggie. Doesn't take much of that to have the same impact as carbon dioxide. I can't remember nitrous oxide, a couple of others that are out there. So just, and by the way, oh no, there is no climate change. Where do you think that curve is going? Yeah, it's like where we were, and yeah, we started burning some things, and we started, you know, in dumb spots you might burn. Well, not dumb. I'm sorry. It's what they had locally. Burning peat is not a dumb thing if you got to burn something to stay warm in the winter. But you know, okay, there's burning nice seasoned oak versus burning peat versus burning coal, etc. We existed for a number of years doing through that. Then we're like, ooh, look at this. Fossil fuels, boom, off the charts.
Plus there's more of us.
And there's more of us. Yeah. Okay, so from there, now to the next one. It will be a long or short. Okay, another fun fact. Let's talk about transportation. It seems like everywhere you go to talk about energy now, it's about transportation. I got a million of something else.
Texas going to stay on Bitcoin money?
Oh,
That's a later.
I have a couple of comments on that later in here. So there are certain, when I was younger, I would never have thought that big government was the answer to anything. I am so discouraged with the ability of anything other than popular opinion to cause a change in society. And now look at what popular opinion is like today. You know, yeah, open warfare. So I'm not about to say anything really good about China, other than, you know, in a generation, they were able to bring their population from what we would consider poverty level to middle class. You know, 1 billion people in a generation. Amazing work. Not that I'm saying that they did it well, they just did it. Now, how did they do it? They did it with centralized policies. And so, for example, back to Bitcoin, they decided that this is a horrible thing to do. Now, okay, is that, you know, it's almost like in Texas, you think that, well, if California did it, that means the legislature is going to make sure we don't do it. Maybe it's the same thing with China. The Chinese thought it was a bad idea. We think it's a good idea. Rest of the US did not. There are some wonderful stories you can tell about, oh, but wait, they're going to do demand response. And oh, well, wait, they're going to allow us to build out more generation, which means that we'll always have more margin and there will be newer plants and this, that, and the other. Bitcoin mining will go away in 7 years. So all of those plants, all of those infrastructure components, I'm not saying blockchain won't go away. Blockchain is the future. It does not require this money grubbing. Oh, well, you know, if I do this, I also make money. It's like I use fictitious money to make more fictitious money. There are other ways to do blockchain besides Bitcoin. And Bitcoin doesn't require the type of processing. There are some of the digital coinages that do not do this reward system with the big compute behind it.
But are they growing?
They're growing by leaps and bounds. I got those stats here in a minute. They're growing like gangbusters. Texas has laid out the red carpet. Okay.
The board that CEOs go to prison too, they'll kind of lend to some of them.
Okay, so how do we solve the problem that was just up there? Okay, this is where I don't think politics is the same as opinions. It sort of is, but if you can argue it, you got a basis. Is it still an opinion? But again, you know, be careful when you take these sorts of things and just try to throw them out to other people as whether they're a fact. whether they're science, whether they're politics, whether they're opinions. Basically, we've got to either decarbonize our energy chain, or we can modify it in some way, which is still sort of equivalent to decarbonize, but reduce the big easy ones to possibly change are the transportation, food production, agriculture threads. Or we've got to consume less or consume more efficiently. You know, again, we could move to alternative energies and still consume the same amount. The price today would be higher, in which case, you know, I'll get back to where I first met the NTREG. You know, should you pay more or less, you with solar on your roof? You guys used to be a lot more solar focused, and you still are. Should you with solar on your roof pay more or less than the neighbor next door, same size footage, same amenities in the house, but oh, by the way, come August, he's got his windows open, and you know, he's on whatever the least efficient energy plan is, and he's willing to pay for it, and he's just blowing stuff out the windows. And you, on the other hand, have got your energy efficient house and solar. And so again, the issue can be not just are you willing to consume less energy, but how is it that you have chosen to produce that energy? And are there sufficient incentives in there to say why you should be paying less for what you did? Forget the benefits on the earth. You know, even just from a consumer point of view, you know, why is it that the utility wants to tell me that right now,
I use twice as much energy as half the price.
or if you use, see, that you hit the nail on the head, it's energy. Oncor, wires company. We support power transport. Power. Energy transport over our power system is for the wholesalers and retailers to worry about. So yes, there are some places where that breaks down. If I have to, in my transport system, stay at peak power 24/7, that's going to have a different impact on the system than somebody who only asks for peak power once or twice. But that's not really where the rub is. The rub is the pipe I made to your house, the transformers that were there, et cetera, had to be big enough for that peak. And after that, we just kind of have to assume that, well, if they want to take it 24/7, that's kind of my problem. I told them I give them this much power capacity. How much energy they take through it is really a market issue for the consumers and producers that Oncor and the wires companies need. So again, where I met the North Texas Renewable Energy Group was when, not our recent rate case that was settled just 2 months ago, but our prior rate case back before first Florida Power and Light and Berkshire Hathaway. We were going through, oh gosh. Okay, more fun facts. Go look up the most expensive. Who here thinks they know what the most expensive bankruptcy in its history was? And the name of the company started with me. Wrong. I'll look up some other company's history that we've been talking about recently, like in the last 30 seconds. But anyways, no, the Enron was a huge debacle. It was very public. But just go back and look at the reason that we had when TXU, Luminant, and Oncor, the wires company, were still one company. And what happened through there?
Energy resources.
Yes, energy resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something about another transparency.
Yeah, so go back and look at the history of that. It was, we were the, by the way, part of the company that I hired into was the only one that was profitable at the time of that bankruptcy. We're doing just fine.
That's because you're a regulator.
That's true. That's another, at least finally, this year, the legislature took out the part of our incentive program that said, oh, if it's hot, your employees will make more money next year in their bonus. That's been there for 20 years.
And now one of these generation companies advertises free energy on the hottest days of the year. Have you heard that, Ann?
It's, believe me.
So they're saying on the hottest day of the year, you can crank up your air conditioner because we're gonna give it to you for free. I say, how does that help Oncor? or
Okay,
anybody
then
else?
you get so that's the disincentive part of that for good behavior. But the other is, look at it from the perspective of risk management of a retailer. They're buying energy in free markets, long-term contracts, they head contracts and calls, they don't have to sign a contract, they may get bid and accept it, they don't have to take it until the next day if they want to or need to. And then if they didn't do enough on the day ahead, they have to take it in the real time market. If you go back and look at it from a risk perspective, the issue becomes, why do any of these retailers offer any programs at all? And I would guarantee you, none of them are taking any risk when they offer these other more exotic programs. If you look at it from a, how is it gonna alter the energy that they buy on those three markets at a price, they've got all that worked out.
But it's horrible for the
Yes.
distribution system to be encouraging people to use more energy on the hottest days because it's free. It should be incredibly expensive.
Well, they're already,
Oh, that's
they're
all.
already incentivizing people to use
This
more
is
energy.
THU,
because
I
You get charged a higher rate if you use less kilowatt hours
Yes,
per month.
yes. Believe me, they're not losing money on
Everybody
these programs.
residential who uses less than 1,500.
Yeah.
Gets penalized for that.
There was another commercial I saw on TV that I was like, how many ways are they gonna do this? It was the woman who was leaving her house and the dog, she, turned down the air conditioner, turned on the TV, the dog turned on and got in the electric vibrating chair and did all these things as part of the, hey, don't worry, you're on our energy plan and it doesn't matter what you do when it's.
Oh, no.
That wasn't exactly the byline at the end of it, to your point. Yes.
So
Okay.
we're all talking about saving energy, and they're talking about wasting it. Don't worry.
Okay, so you got three basics. All of these you could say are derivative to the decarbonization, but there are different pieces of it that can talk about alternative energy sources. So let's talk about, the politics that gets involved. As soon as you start trying to talk about any of those three, where people, the haves, the have-nots, the gotta-haves, the wanna-haves, the people who fear for their futures, this, that, and the other. I have so much problem with us saying, that the rest of the developing world is the problem. We blaze the path. So now we're trying to tell people, don't take the path we blazed.
But then can't we just say that we have improved technology and install renewable sources and a minimum of fossil fuel?
We can, but this gets into this whole issue, and it's my second one of, we want to make a spin just out of this about the amount of coal generation being going on in China right now. Like, they don't have the right, they're breaking the rules. And the issue is, first of all, historically, we, the United States, and I would say Texas, by 1/3 of it, caused global warming. It wasn't Europe, it wasn't China, it wasn't anybody else. When we were measuring it, it was being suppressed. And I will use that word suppressed. This is why I'm not here, Parks and Wildlife or Oncor. When that information was being suppressed, we already knew that the US practices, which were far and away above all the rest of the world combined, were leading to this conclusion.
Yeah, but as your flow chart, which I've used for years, elections, shows we, the United States, are wasting 65% of the energy we produce. So how can we possibly have any argument about our integrity as a nation producing and using energy?
And the energy, so if we ever wrap our arms around really the carbon and greenhouse side of things, the rest of that energy equation comes down to heat as well, and the thermodynamics issue. We haven't regulated carbon and emissive gases other than what they free. And there's some voluntary carbon credit programs that are effectively meaningless, unless you're in Europe. You know, if you're in Europe, you can pay over $100 per metric ton equivalent of carbon, you know, that you're gonna get taxed. That in EU itself, for all members, it's already up in the mid 50, 70 something dollars, but then each state can also put additional taxes on. So when you want to go buy your fuel at home, it has had a tax on it for its carbon equivalent credit. And oh, by the way, it doesn't just go back into the general fund, which, you know, thinking of collecting money for this, but then plowing it back into something that isn't the solution, that would be like them taking $400 from my electric vehicle and then not getting it to the Department of Transportation, which, oh, by the way, is the way it works. Texas, I think it's 47% of the road use tax actually goes back to the Department of Transportation. It's one of the lowest in the United States. Don't even get started on when I calculated how much for the amount that I drive or the weight of my vehicle should be paying for that vehicle. Okay, so there are equity issues, and if nothing else, we have a responsibility for having placed that path and dealing with it. We have the resources and are capable of altering that future vector, and not just for ourselves. That China is now doing our manufacturing and that we want to buy it, and that's why they build coal plants. Is that their fault? This one, I mean, regulations or incentives. Without that, I can't see. Well, we'll get to it here in another one. That's another thing that happened in the news this week. There's a ton of equity. You know, Ford is pumping $30–40 billion into this electrification. Across the industry, it's like $200 billion has been announced in the last, probably 24 months by manufacturers of what they're going to be doing to electrify their future chains. Then you've got the other billions of dollars that are going into all of these chargers, smart charging systems, vehicle grid integration, bidirectionals, this, that, and the other, to the possibility that we don't just look at those, each one of them, their own swim lane economic projects, and we say, oh, well, you know, the whole freaking system is changing at once. You know, people behind the meter are producing energy, people behind the meter are storing energy, people behind the meter are able to interact with the grid in ways that they hadn't before, to transact the energy demands in cycles that allow you to think about what type of energy is generated when. You know, think of that as an energy ecosystem as opposed to how did this one market change and what am I doing to solve it. Longer term solutions. You know, the letter of the guidance is already out there by executive order, and the rulemaking is still following through on exactly how much each corporate report will have to talk about their energy risks, their ESG risks, their future business in terms of I'm an investor, and if you didn't tell me that, what did I say before? What was going to be on in 7 years? Bitcoin. You didn't tell me that, you know, that there was a possibility that somebody has a completely different way to do this, and that your investment in this business would be worthless in a number of years. And did you disclose to me what you needed to under the standard Securities and Exchange reporting? This sort of stuff, I listened, and the thing that was I meant to before I got here today, look up. He had a foreign accent, so maybe it was from Total or from NL or one of the big energy companies, but he was talking about his fiduciary responsibility to his investors, how a gradual transition away from fossil fuels was required because it was the only prudent thing to do. And he was doing fine. He had like these 3 or 4 reasons that, you know, if you just put $100 per ton equivalent tax on carbon tomorrow, and basically nobody could sell oil, it would be chaos. When you know what you do, start paying $50 a gallon for your gasoline. Or by the way, we talked about how gasoline prices would come down. That's true until the point where there's so little consumption of it, the price starts going back up. Another good group to read if you haven't read their materials is Rethink X. they have a paradigm for as long as it's a completely logical sequence. They will state up front all of their assumptions and then bring you through a logical chain based on those assumptions. You cannot usually fault the chain that they take or the conclusions they make. You can only challenge their assumptions. And that's another one that talks about how just storage and solar, for example, can, cause within, I think they said 7 years, the cost of gasoline to go up by an order of magnitude, and basically nobody will buy cars because it's just not worth it. So SEC report. I was saying this CEO was doing a great job of talking about all these economic impacts if you don't think about how you're going to transition from energy as it is to energy as it needs to be, or needs to alter, not necessarily even knowing the to be end state. And then his last one was, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders. And it's like, and did you tell them that you might not be in business in 20 years? Was that in your reporting with them for just this reason? And so we'll get to some of that in just a bit. De-incent development of homes and businesses in places that require more emissions, or tax bailouts for disaster relief. Like, oh my gosh, there's like 30% of Houston's electrical infrastructure could be underwater in 10 years. Like, oh my gosh. Florida.
Wait, say that again? What percentage of Houston's electrical infrastructure?
30%, I think, was at risk to, it wasn't just underwater, it was to catastrophic swell from hurricanes, but 30% with the increased types of events that are happening could be underwater.
Why they need more wind power.
Well, and it's just, yeah, they're on that stupid marl ground anyways. It's not-
So Phoenix right now cannot get water.
Exactly.
They cannot get water, there is no more water.
So, and yet
It's
there's,
stunning that those municipalities were actually going ahead and making those laws though, and they're actually paying attention to reality.
and yet you still have people moving there and or to Miami, et cetera. There's a lot of places where it's just kind of, even if you could provide the resources there, they're the ones who are over the 1 million BTUs per day instead of just 830,000.
I'm not sure anybody in Dallas should be crying about.
No, right.
Because it's 100 degrees outside.
No, what was it? The thing that I just saw this morning in the paper, it's like, so they rate the top 10 hottest cities in the United States over 500,000. It was like maybe 7 of them are in Texas this week. We're number 4, Houston, or Fort Worth was number 1. Houston was not on that list. It was San Antonio, Austin. So bottom line is, this concerns me. It should concern everybody. Some days, when I'm turning off the light in a room that I'm leaving, it's kind of like, why bother? I drove here in an electric today. I really considered taking the mass transit, but it would have been 3 hours of trip time for me today. I want to do things on an individual level, and these things are important, but we don't have the time for that. We don't have the inclination for that. I mean, if somebody wants to, blow and go and get on an airplane, take a cruise, whatever, they're paying the price that's being asked. It's not a big deal. It's like, Greta, I'm not going to fly to the event. I'm going to take a ship. It took me 2 weeks to get there. It's sort of like, well, I get the point that you're trying to make, but it's not, and the public reaction to what she did was indeed the target. I don't know that we can do enough individually other than yell and scream and find anyone that we can find to try to get more people to yell and scream and do something about it.
Well, that's the thing, it's the marketing, right? And then you've got Ron DeSantis and other politicians working against ESG, right? The ESG. It's like, oh, so companies are now not allowed to be fiduciaries for their shareholders because they can't talk about the risks.
And so at the same time, the insurance companies are getting online with
Now,
ESG.
that will be our saving grace,
Yes.
that they have not paid attention or forced the issue yet. I really, if you can't legislate it, get them in the pocketbook. And the insurance companies, I think, will be one of the saving graces. I'm ready for a transition. As a matter of fact, I think that is just a transition slide. Oh, we talked about energy use in different countries and different. What do you think?
I would like to see that total CO2 number, because that's per capita.
Yeah.
We're not number one.
Where are we on this? We're right behind Canada.
No, I'm not talking about per capita.
Oh.
Total energy.
Oh, total.
By country.
This gets hard because India is really big.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
They're also, they're not very energy intensive compared to even China. They just don't have as much manufacturing and export, which is where China came
But
on.
this is just these artificial political boundaries we're countries have.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is just lines drawn on the map. We're humans on the earth. We just happen to draw these political boundaries.
Okay, and this was just a transition slide, so one more. And now we're gonna get back to actually the reason that I titled the slide, what I titled it today, I think. So let's see, John Hammond something, hyphenated last name, Texas State Climatologist, published reports. I think it was 2022, the citation will be on here, like in 2021, where he just happened to choose 2036, the centennial year. If you go out and you look at the IECC or you look at the National Climate Assessment, which I am waiting with bated breath, we should be seeing the US's every 4-year congressionally mandated NCA National Climate Assessment should be out this fall, I think it is. It's through the period through 2022 that will be out there this year. That's another fun thing to watch what happened with the last administration for the last report. The report actually came out not too bad, other than it being more graphic and less. So underneath that it says something about, what does my title normally say? It says 2036 climate impacts on Oncor equipment and operations. There's an asterisk to the citation down at the bottom that you also can't see. That is per the climate impact assessment version 03. Oh wait, that was my work. The data from the climatologist, stream weather in Texas, 1900 through 2036, 2021 update. And there are in that 3 scenarios. I took the most likely scenario. So what I call the base case scenario for 2036, there are 6 climate regions that were assessed. Oncor is this overlay that you see, the 2 big blue areas that almost connect out here now. That's Oncor's service area. And obviously there are co-ops and unis within that. So it's not like everything within there, but we have clients somewhere within there. This is an assessment I was asked to do internally, and after it was done, our vice president of compliance, who has all the ESG stuff under it, said, "Can you clean that up and make it to be something?" He's on the 2036 commission. Said, I want to be able to share this with them. So this is the cleaned up version. So in our North Texas area, and sometimes I'll talk about a specific area, but most of the time it's thinking of the North Central region, but not exclusively. Let's go around. So from a utility perspective, a transmission and delivery electric utility perspective. So I don't make the energy, I don't sell it to you under whatever sort of program you buy it from, but we get it back and forth between the makers and the users. And the users are increasingly interacting with that market either as makers of their own or controllable loads, etc. So facilitating that environment is our job. We care from a perspective of our equipment. I mentioned the capacity base. It has to be big enough to do whatever you expect at your premise. And that kind of sets our fees forever. Our operations are really not, other than repair of that equipment. Most of it is associated with getting the electricity to your place, the transformers, this, that, and the other. We just decommissioned a couple of years ago a transformer out in East Texas that I don't know how GE got wind of it, but they were like, "We want that back." And we took it out of service, by the way. It was still working. but it was one of these weird distribution voltages. It was down at like a couple thousand volts and, you know, not what we consider the 12,000 volt typical distribution primary. And so we were upgrading some equipment. We actually still have, I think, one wooden substation out there that's still operational. But we took this out of commission and they wanted it back. It was from 16, I want to say, still functioning. Wow. So
What a return on investment.
that's true. And so the thing is that, again, the utilities costs are typically associated with the size and type of infrastructure that they bring down. Now, you know, computers came in the 70s and we got, you know, coordinated auto closers, and we got different types of breakers, and we've got different types of monitoring that we can do on synchro phasers. We got a lot more complex in doing basically the same thing we had been doing, which was flowing energy downhill from the big plants to the houses. But that's continued to change as, you know, distributed energy resources, a lot of other capabilities are coming there. We still, from that build out perspective, care mostly about cooling periods overnight. We're popping equipment right now, the last couple of weeks, because the nights aren't low enough to let the oil cool down enough to where we would have the overcurrent insults the next day at the peak demand that the transformer just finally says pump. So it's the cooling that's mostly of concern to us. And so the average summer lows projected by the state climatologist, this is 13 years from now, are 6 degrees higher than Texas. How many of you camp with scouts or just as a family routinely in the summer in Texas? See, with scouts, you don't have the opportunity to say, we're going camping and we're going to Colorado. You know, I can't think of anything worse in my 20 years of interacting with yes.
Unless you get a big
Well, no, okay.
Yeah.
Well, and it gets cool at night. But that's what I was about to say, is the ugliness about camping in the summer is when you're at 82 or 83 degrees at the coolest part of the night, which is that 1 hour before you wake up in the morning, you just don't sleep well, if at all. I mean,
Especially the humidity is 70%.
So, you know, I am glad that I am not gonna be camping with the scouts, luckily, in 13 years. And I pity the poor scoutmasters who will.
Are you gonna put big cooling fans on your transformers? Or what?
Oh, no. they're passive. Oh, what can you do? Would you propose that we go out and actually change out the 100,000 distribution transformers that we have?
No. That's what I was adding. Can you add any fans to them or bigger cooling
Wait, we
fans?
could put a
or
refrigerant unit on it. Now
No,
we
no.
50%
No,
capacity.
and I was rather flip in my response, because you're right, the reason I painted this is somebody has to figure out, is it gonna be acceptable that we're just changing out that many more transformers? Or do we start buying new transformers? Okay, we're these, so now I'm putting in some few thousand a year that are these more resilient systems, but I'm still dealing with the hundreds of thousands of that are out there.
Or you have to build the system so that you can lower the derating.
I'm not the power engineer who figured out how to respond to this. I knew where the sensitivities were and pointed them out.
Well, it's not quite the same, but California's got the problem with wildfires, right, bringing down the
Mhm.
lines, so now,
Yeah.
now, in preparation, they just shut the power off.
PSPS.
Yeah, so, but that's a
Public
similar
safety,
kind of
public
thing.
safety power
It's
shut
a
off.
huge area that they have to deal with, and what do you do?
And their problems are different than our problems, and they're vertically integrated utilities, so they can kind of do it a different way. Than in Texas, we only own those wires, we can't think about the part of the equation that might have to do with
Right, well, you've got the
energy
generation.
management and things like that.
So you're saying the answer might be, instead of running at 99%, we can now run at 85? Is that the answer? Because the fact that you now can't cool it all, now you have to lower the maximum output of that transformer?
Yes.
By
And here's, okay.
Lifetime.
Again, my flip answer was because there's so much crud in the ground, and it's the same stuff that was there 100 years ago, some of it. When we build transmission systems, this is 60-year capital, and it's still probably gonna be operational after that. We don't-
Been in testing.
It's it's hugely expensive is my point, and the thought of coming back in 10 years and saying, I gotta do something different, or I have to do it in these hundreds of thousands of locations, and oh, by the way, we're gonna charge everybody.
Energy
Your rate.
efficiency.
Energy efficiency, exactly. So all I have to do in that situation is shift when the loads are happening, so the
How do
peak.
you make all the homeowners and businesses in Texas become 10% more energy efficient?
So I haven't heard this.
This power.
Or use batteries.
The last time that I went to the ERCOT Market Summit, I actually presented 3 papers there. Or it was 2 panels on paper, but this was pretty cool. I think it was 2019, I was there. And I actually heard on one of the panels, a guy said, well, and he was using the 2045 or 2050. This was the period under which they believed that the Texas energy consumption would double. So that we were going to, that the ERCOT grid was going to need to be twice as big as it is today. And he said, there were, on his panel, I was not on that panel, I don't even remember who it was, but of the 4 people up there, he's the last one who spoke, and he said, well, I think 95% of this can be done with consumer side and policy as opposed to wires.
California, even our Texas.
Yeah, and the thing is that nobody really picked them apart on it. It was kind of like, well, we can either double the size of the grid, or we can get twice as efficient. And twice as efficient does not mean stop building and consuming to the same ends of your way of life. It just means you have to take a different path to get the energy there.
So what is Oncor doing to improve efficiency in all these homes and businesses to avoid having to upgrade the grid?
Okay, here's an interesting one, and I'll get to this. Matter of fact, I'm not supposed to. Everything shouldn't be about transportation, but there's a ton of money going in, a ton of opportunity. Right now, our energy efficiency programs, we have to propose a plan of what we're going to do with some money each year to be able to then recover that money as part of our operations. We have to make a proposal to the Texas Public Utility Commission, Texas, UCT, of what we're going to do with our energy efficiency funds. The metrics that they use are based solely on consumption reduction. I cannot avoid peak. I can only avoid energy consumption. We did get permission recently to start a pilot on a time-shifting energy efficiency program for fleet level electric vehicle charge management. And we're not spending much money on it. We've got this little program. There's going to be a couple dozen fleet level participants. We don't even require that they do a certain amount of shifting on this first couple of year pilot. We're only measuring what they do and what their ability to shift might be. Because we are trying to make the argument to the Public Utility Commission that if our costs are driven by that peak load, why can't I recover efficiency that avoids peak load? It's the 95% solution we were just talking about, that it doesn't just have to be energy reduction. So, I can promote somebody putting an LED light in where they had a CFL or whatever. I can promote you putting PV on your house. Even that probably, that's been getting whittled down over the years. Now it's west facing. Do we incent bifacials? And, should we be looking at trying to push the industry as opposed to just saying it's a reduction, whatever. That kind of formula is getting changed every year. The types of programs that we're looking at, we're trying to say, listen, you're not allowing us to develop system level solutions that include the generators and the consumers. So why in the things we do for efficiency are we only being measured against things that are impacting the generators and consumers. And so I don't know how far that argument will go, but that's an example of the types of things we're doing.
If the average summer lows are 6 degrees higher,
In north central Texas, we're worse than most other.
well, what's gonna happen when everybody's got an electric car and they're charging it at night? And they put in a lot more DC chargers in the network and the different places, so that the electric usage actually doesn't go way down at night, but it stays pretty high while the temperature is high. That's gonna be a problem.
No, this was an overlay to, we've already done independently analyses of residential charging and commercial charging of electric vehicles, and looked at the potential curves would be, hence the pilot that I just mentioned. The fleet stuff is gonna eat our lunch, you know, big aggregations of DCFC chargers. But you're right, the death by 1,000 cuts of the, you know, what, there's 25 million vehicles on the Texas roads, you know, and a big chunk of those are electric. The thing is overall, we talked about energy requirements, electricity requirements doubling by 2050, 2045, pick your year argument. Unless some of the other things we'll get to in just a moment actually turn off the Texas miracle, but that's a different story. The impact of vehicle electrification on that is probably only at most 20% of that double. So it's gonna happen anyways. You start getting into, well, but if this 20% behaves this way at these specific times of day, then it becomes a disproportionate impact at a time that we were counting on it. Now, it's not gonna be any better if they decide to do it at peak. But we are looking at, you know, this was a vector in from what's happening in the climate. That's being an overlay to everything else Oncor's having to think about for, gee, maybe we need to disclose this to the SEC.
So what you're saying is that the grid would only have to be 20% larger to charge
If every
all vehicles.
vehicle today was electric tomorrow, that's all it would take. And by the way, we probably have that much energy a day. If you look at the curtailment, you know, that we have from wind that's not being used at night, from other generators that go down because they know they're not going to meet their market pricing for the low demand at night, that could be generating at night. They are capable of generating that 20% a day. Electric vehicles themselves are not the problem.
And Oncor can get the power grid.
They're already at premises that we're serving, unless you're talking about new DCFCs that are, you know, megawatt chargers that are on islands in the middle of nowhere on I-20, you know, where no, we don't have a megawatt of energy we're waiting to pump into those for. There are some issues there too. I'm also working that sort of stuff. Let me hit a second box. So, all right, so no more sleeping with scouts at night. I should have said that.
No more camping with scouts in the summer.
Oh, I'm sorry, and that was recorded. Okay, days over 100. Again, the stress of not cooling down at night comes when you're in sustained periods of heat. Not only is it cooler at night, but the chance that you're in a long run of 100-degree days is doubled. Now, this has more impacts other than, so we had load issues here, we had cool down issues here. Here we get a more varied type of response. The hotter you get, the more not only energy that you start pushing through a line, but the longer that it's hot and the heat outside, those lines bow down. Their efficiencies are lowered. So you've got line ratings as efficiencies, you've got span impacts that they just weren't designed to be that hot that long. So now it's kind of like what, you have to go out and do maintenance and surgery on stuff that worked fine for the last 100 years. Oh, were people doing that job? Do I have to put this guy out? I mean, I you know, the thing you've been hearing about postal system, you know, and their workers are out there in unair conditioned trucks. I mean, a part of me laughs, but that's only because I'm from upstate New York when I see a tractor with an air conditioner on. But then again, if I was driving a tractor in Texas, I'd either be done with my work by noon, or they're gonna put an air conditioner on. Peak load increase again has an impact on what we need to build and how we do it. Those device failures, and again, it interacts with that lesser cool down period. Severe rains, and this is actually really interesting because it is pretty clear that whereas you can find all the numbers over the last 20 years, these numbers aren't really forward projections. Looking at the last 10 years, I was with John just recently, what conference were we at, where he said, I don't argue with people about this anymore. I show them the last 10 years of data and ask them to complete the plot. Severe weather, the jury's kind of out. You know, yeah, it seems like we've seen more Cat 4 and 5 hurricanes. Yeah, it seems like there's maybe more EF3s and 4, and we're certainly seeing them in parts of the country that we haven't seen them as typically. What was it, Cape Cod? Somewhere got a heard of a tornado. What? So this one, maybe there's something going on there. The same thing with Uri, you know, is that type of event, even though we're heating, is the instability leading to the possibility that we're going to see more severe oscillations. Jury's out on that class, not on this one. This is another one where you just look at the amount of rainfall that you get in these types of pop-up thunderstorms. And so now we're at the point where when we did the engineering to look at the ground and to, you know, lay that understructure for those $1 million a mile transmission lines, we now got to worry about, oh, wait a minute, this one's been subjected to this amount of severe weather, these amounts of times, what's, you know, what are we doing prophylactically, or, oh, right, there goes another one. Precipitation overall, if you just look at the amount, Texas is one of those sweet spots. You can go to the southeast, you can go to the southwest, either side of us, east or west, and they're going to see significant deltas, one less, one more in their amount of rainfall. We're overall going to be about the same. Problem is, it's all coming at once.
An inch rains a year.
Well, I don't live in Corpus for a reason, I thought.
Frisco had a lot of rain the other night.
Oh, yeah, there was one, I mean, right on the northern edge of town, and it's like McKinney got 8 inches of rain one day, and I got nothing. Now, longer, deeper droughts. This was a part of the Dust Bowl, and by the way, that only happened under historic variability of the type that we were seeing a century ago. You think about throwing that on. Now, good news is, although it could happen, maybe with more incidents, the chances that it could unhappen are equally as good, because again, I think what we're seeing is more oscillation in the extremes. Whether or not we'd actually end up in the Dust Bowl, I think it couldn't persist the same way that the great Oklahoma, North Texas one did not 100 years ago. But in those droughts, you know, you're also into a lot of other issues for Oncor. We have lost in the last, you know, we lost some transmission towers to fire a couple of years back. We're the ability to cool generators. You know, does anybody know why during Uri the Comanche Peak went offline? It was the water. It was they couldn't pull enough water out of the lake to continue the cooling. Now it's the opposite of the one that I'm talking about here, but people don't always equate, you know, when you talk about a power plant, even one that you think is kind of a standalone thing. The other is we lost coal plants in East Texas. Why? They couldn't chip the coal out of the ice to move it to the burners. So you know these climatic things. Now those are impacts more on Oncor on the you think from the generation standpoint, but when you rapidly change where the nodal energy is coming into the system, our transmission isn't ready to pick up any arbitrary amount of energy from anywhere anywhere else. It's called congestion. As a matter of fact, when I look into an ugly part of the industry is looking at congesting pricing of the energy.
Seems like the other thing that should be factored in there is just inertia. Because, you know, the whole freezing happened in 2011.
Yeah, oh, no,
I mean, and there's-
everything that happened in
there's
2011
inertia,
happened
and
here.
You realize a problem, and 10, 12 years later, nobody's done anything.
All they had to do for the Uri final report was rip
Yeah.
the one off of the report
That's
where
where
it said
they-
2011, plop a 2 in there, and they would have had their after action on Uri. Same story, same exact story.
So is the Texas legislature aware of this stuff?
Okay,
Aware.
No, it's not wind.
That's right.
Flying kites.
yes, it was wind turbines. We were down from the predicted 2 gigawatts of generation of wind. Indeed, we produced only 1. It had only 50% of that dang wind energy was there. Well, wait a minute, where did the other 70 gigawatts come from? Oh, well, we lost 40 gigawatts of natural gas, but I didn't mention that.
The other thing was those were reported early.
Yes.
The first ones that went down were one by one, all these wind turbines, and so it looks impressive. But it was a sequential thing.
No, I'm not ready to go down the path of the Texas legislature and bills. Yes, they're aware. It's gotta be groundswell of people. And if you want to set your targets on anything, I'll tell you right now, and I'm still being recorded. Put your attention on the Texas Railroad Commission. It isn't even, it's a local place that is the permission for where all the unregulated, look at what we do compared to what any other state does on methane emissions. And, we probably prosecute more oil fryer industries for more money than we do oil and gas. It just goes downhill from there.
And one thing is we still call it the Texas Railroad Commission because we're not brave enough to make up some new names that really are focused on those industries like energy. Right?
Well, how can the energy state, which I think is almost our unofficial nickname,
Right.
not have a state energy office?
I know.
That's not.
We have SECO, which is sort of there to administer some federal funding for equity issues. We have.
Reliability Council, but it's not an energy office.
Oh,
I'm curious though,
oh, man,
your number there about,
I'm like, if I finish this and then we turn off the thing, can I answer these questions?
turn off the recording.
Yeah.
But the 6-degree increase in average summer lows, right now, our summer low is like 78 to 82 at night.
Think
If
about
you go
it.
to 88, the most recent research is that a wet bulb temperature 88, the humans can't survive.
But that's okay, we have energy, we just throw more energy at the equation.
So now
As
all
long
the
as
animals
you're
die,
written,
and as long as you have, everybody
Well,
has
that's the
air
problem.
conditioning.
Calculate that.
Yeah, you gotta
Calculate
go
that.
down.
Oh, that, no. we
Like
should
take
work on
tomatoes
that.
in summer here anyways.
As
You can grow them, but they won't fruit.
Yeah.
Our last solution, if you can't increase the grid, you don't choose to, is to take. So like, instead of putting solar panels up there and connecting to the grid, we should just get.
There is that.
Yeah.
There is.
Increasingly number of
And-
residents.
But again, even in that scenario, I would argue that the capital that individuals are willing to put into that part of the solution or communities is similar to, okay, we're all gonna be buying electric vehicles. Did I really just do that only for the purpose of transportation? If that asset, if that ability to communicate, if maybe you're not always off grid, but even though you're connected, you're either net exporting or just connecting for the hell of it and making sure it's a zero balance and you're curtailing on your side. But you're still connected, for example, like the largest bike grid in the United States, University of Texas in Austin. It's always connected to the ERCOT grid. but it's never exporting or importing. The balance is at zero. If the grid goes down, they don't care. They're already running on their own local power. They have the ability, however, to export if the city asks for it. And they have the ability that if their power goes down, they can import. And they twice a year test some things. And so they open up that channel. But the bottom line is they and Austin Energy have come to a system solution where each of their investments add to a better than individual whole. So
Does
what's
Greg
point
Abbott
is
know
that,
about that?
what's that?
Does Greg Abbott know about that? He would stop it.
Yeah, this is like,
UT Austin.
yeah, I want to say it's about, we're not quite 200 megawatts. But all their generation, they even do some really cool stuff. They central hot water and chilled water throughout the campus from their energy plants.
A lot of this happened in 1972. There was the great Oscar Wilde problem with the natural gas, and they cut off the natural gas, and UT went down. And they had to close the whole campus. So yes, they're a separate entity there.
But they are continuously interconnected.
Yes.
But on purpose have chosen, they could export, but under kind of a gentleman's agreement. Who is it pays who $2.5 million? Because in what direction? Yeah, they pay Austin Energy for the possibility that they may need to pull electricity, so maintain the energy available side of the equation. UT pays Austin Energy, but they could export. They have enough that they could export. They agreed not to and screw things up and sit. Deeper droughts, precipitation within. Now, here's the bottom two are at the bottom for a reason. There's kind of the one-offs. You know, there are other things that climate is doing to our state, our clientele, our future business, et cetera, that do impact us as a company in terms of profit and loss sort of stuff. You went earlier, we made the same profit, whether it's on this much money or that much money, but the company likes it to be that. So we are a regulated entity and our profit is set by those rate cases, but how much business is being done in Texas, how much electricity is being consumed, then raises that fixed amount up or down. So what you're gonna see is that there's gonna be, man, bad time to be on the Texas coast. I am so happy I am not center point trying to do the equivalent of the slide and figure out how to deal with it. Agriculture bust years, you know, this sort of stuff. What was the one? Peaches this year. It's like 90-something% of the Georgia peach crop is lost this year. Did not get cold enough for enough days over the winter. I think there's something like it needs 8 days under.
But it wasn't a peach tree, it was a percentage.
Back to the first couple of slides. Not knowing why things work as well as they work today under climate change conditions from a biome perspective. I don't know if we're gonna be living the life, you know, all of a sudden Dallas looks like San Diego. You know, beautiful temperature all year round, low humidity, everything's wonderful, no oscillations. But that's the thing is we really don't know enough about the impacts of temperature goes up or nights go low or this, that, but we do know that it's changing and it's a problem.
But we don't have a giant heat sink off to our west, like San Diego.
Yeah, that's true.
60-degree heat sink.
Right. But my point is that to the precipitories, does that mean all of a sudden there is no more rice or cotton in Texas and Louisiana? I don't know. Somebody else is worrying that part of the problem. But there are huge impacts and there are going to be bust years. Those bust years impact our clients, impact the amount of money we make on them buying electricity. Stranded assets, you know, where you've built infrastructure. This is my point with Bitcoin. We're out there plowing stuff. I mentioned earlier about the Permian. You know, a third of our construction is happening to bring more energy to the Permian.
Well, and also.
Is that gonna be there in 60 years, getting the return on the assets we're used to?
And liquefied natural gas on the coast. I mean, for your infrastructure.
That has multiple impacts. First of all, we're owned by Sempra now. Who owns two of the biggest plants down there, just brought them online, just brought another one online this year. We're ring fenced, we're not supposed to care about those things. But there's them as consumers of electricity as well. I think that's got quite a run left in it.
Well, especially because they're pulling gas via pipeline down there. First, it's into
Yeah, half of it gets there.
Yeah, well, but that's better than flaring it. You actually got something for the flared gas,
Where
right?
was it? There was one of the bullets up there on my last one that talked about a report that found out that determined that it was only some few $1 billion could mitigate 50% of the upstream emissions loss. The flaring, the uncapped wells, the rest of it. Yeah, the invisible stuff.
There's a lot of downstream stuff, methane leaking everywhere.
Yeah, but the thing is that there's nobody telling the industry that they have to do that. Okay.
Well, it's illegal to take your infrared camera and go out and detect a leak and then report it.
Yeah,
In Texas.
unfortunately, there's now satellites that can do that just about as well. All right, so stranded assets, per consumer energy intensity, I mean, it depends. I mean, depending on how that transition back to the guy from Total or NL or wherever he was. Yes, there will be impacts on individuals in terms of, if you tell me that energy costs this much tomorrow, I'm just not gonna do something. So I'm not really sure what's gonna happen there, but there are economic impacts, there are regulatory impacts. Boy. Who is the largest consumer of electricity in Texas? More fun facts. It's on the chart, just realize that. I can say this. This is like.
Water district company or?
This is a company, a single company, not an industry. Is it a company or an industry? It might even be a company level. That is even scarier than the statement I made before in terms. It's at least a market segment in which there are only a handful of players.
Oh, fertilizer. No.
Anyone knows what that is?
I don't know what UFE is.
Unaccounted for energy. I'm responsible for taking energy and giving it to somebody else. It doesn't all get there. Oh,
Can lose as much as, I think, 8 or 9% on the streets before they have to worry about looking for the natural gas.
Bottom line is, that makes me a consumer.
But a transmission line Oncor,
That's who's made
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
That makes us the largest user of electricity.
That's why I want to get rid of it.
She just wiped her job out.
Oh, that was the one biggest scream collectively I got in presenting this statement. I just realized that. And then the operations that we need to do out of when we build things, we like to, we're a bank whose assets are the green, instead of cash, we're putting iron in the ground. And so it's basically, we make money by putting stuff out there and leaving it there and collecting money on it, like a bank, except for it's stuck in the ground. We make a lot more money on the transmission side because it's easier and stays in the ground and needs less attention than on the every house, every furnace, every distribution, every vegetation, cut, every this, that, and the other. Shifting the balance because of the things that are happening across here to an impact that means more service out of the distribution side as opposed to the transmission side changes our profitability and models and income.
What does DER stand for?
I'm sorry, distributed energy resources, the amount of things that are proximal to the user, whether they're utility side, small power plants that are on distribution lines as opposed to transmission connected, or whether they're customer behind the meter assets. They're smaller, more ubiquitous power sources or controllable loads throughout the system make our life more complicated. That type of complication costs us more money to deal with per level of effort than transmission flowing it downhill from the big power plants. So that changes our revenue.
Yeah, you can charge for it, but. it's
Right.
effort.
So, another one, boy. I'm glad we spent a little bit of time on here though, because I did say it was gonna be a 2036 thing. I got lots of other things like this, but I'm probably close to needing to shut up.
Well.
Did you press one?
I did
Is
press
that
one,
yours?
but I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, was there another transition?
No, that's not a transition, it'll be a new slide.
It'll
Oh,
be
that
a-
means it's time for fun.
Uh,
Let's see, let's pick on another, and y'all know everything about the wind boom. You've been watching, I hope, what's going on with the solar interconnect queue.
What
I
about
mean,
land there?
about, boy, you know, when Granholm came in, I expected big things out of Texas and geothermal. She was throwing that word around, and so was Texas, and I thought all sorts of stuff. We have lots of opportunity for geothermal energy. You know, it takes really deep wells. There's a couple of different technologies. Randy's personal favorite is, I don't understand why we're not looking at compressed air. You know, we got the big salt domes. You could, just like, we don't have lakes where we can do hydro pumping in water, but we have huge caverns where we could be storing energy when it's cheap. We've got lots of curtailed and, you know, energy sources that could just be filling those things up during the day and be in the battery bank for all the solar and the rest of it that needs to be
Who would
put
be
in there.
looking at that, startup?
You know, it's really weird. There was one that's still licensed down in the, it's not all the way to Austin, it's actually in our Concourse territory that is still licensed. They were active in 2017. The thing is you've got one big plant in Alabama, one big plant in Germany. They're both 30 or 40 years old. They have exceeded all of the projections of cost balance. It's a little bit more expensive overall, but it's a hell of a lot less than a battery. And, you know,
Is this compressed air?
Yeah.
The University of San Antonio was working on that
Yeah.
for quite a while.
But the point being, there's to the tidal energy as well. And now you're seeing the floating solar. There's a lot of other things that are coming on.
That can help to cool some of those hot nights.
Right. Yeah. If we could.
And, you know, just like with the, you know, we're seeing a lot of smaller solar plants go in closer to cities that are maybe only 5-7 megawatt areas where they actually can still do agriculture coincident with, you know, just a little bit thinner of the solar, and everything still gets along just fine.
We had somebody speak to this group a couple months ago about,
That one's, okay, so you're on the next one.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
wait, oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, he was talking about a different kind of storage. This is using wells, and they were actually going to heat up. They were using some source of heat, waste heat, or heat from an industrial process, or some kind of heat, or extra heat generation capability, maybe resistance
Yeah.
heat, electricity, and just pump in hot water.
Brine probably.
Brine,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, just your heat content, yeah.
That's right, so the money in the thing was mitigating the corrosion from the brine, that's where
Yeah.
that's where all the technology.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot,
And that actually showed the advantage is they could put it nearly anywhere, it didn't make much footprint. You just need a small well.
yes, because, for example, compressed air does not scale well. You could do it in a tank in a small area, but not at anything near the efficiencies that you need to be economically viable. And so, but that's the thing is Texas, you know, another one of these Texas miracle things, we are sitting on those huge, you know, the strategic oil reserve is what's filling them up right now. And natural gas, we're storing out there as well as part of, actually, that's a daily market in terms of how much it costs you to push it in versus take it out. But air, you know, I mean, come on, it's air. And so again, back to those two plants, you read the reports on those, and they have surpassed all their operational lifetime expectations, all their efficiency operations. They are dirt stupid. I mean, it is so easy to build those sorts of generators and storage plants, but it's a little bit more expensive than natural gas plants. It's, you know, it's not as easy to put wherever you want it as the big lithium iron phosphate banks that are going out there now. But that's what, if I was gonna push $10 billion out of the legislature, would I put it in gas plants that aren't supposed to run and interfere with the market? It would cost me a whole lot less to build 4 days worth of reserve for probably a third of Texas Energy in East Texas and connected to, and by the way, most of those are near coal plants that are no longer operating because it's the same formation in the ground. They put the pole there, it's got salt dumps there.
And you already got the grid there.
That's what I'm saying, yes, it's already there.
And there would be employment for them.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, you heard about this at your last meeting. Brian was talking dominantly, I think, about bidirectional. Recognize that, I don't know, some 70% probably of all of the grid use cases can be satisfied by managed charging, not necessarily bidirectional flow. Now, that said, I'm working really hard right now with Toyota as our partner. First partnership Oncor has ever entered into. It is not a commercial partnership, but go back and just Google on Toyota and Oncor. We announced in December that we're doing a number of use case studies looking at vehicle grid integration specifically for bidirectional, and the possibility that the capital that is people are spending just to get their transportation could be that much more capital that would be benefiting the Texas grid. You know, utilities are out there making a big to-do about buying these, you know, 50 and 200 megawatt storage plants that are used for fast frequency response, and some of them are actually used for peak shading and this, that, and the other. There is already on the road as much, you know, and this is at our, where are we at? 0.5% penetration of electric vehicles. We already have more storage on the road that, by the way, is connected to the grid longer than it's connected to the road, than everything that the utilities are talking about potentially buying themselves as their own capital assets to do the same job that the vehicles could do if we coordinated that ecosystem to use that energy. And so this talks about what's at an EPRI conference, and I could not believe, I mean, vehicle to grid integration to them was basically just like kids in a candy factory, new load. You know, it was like, wait a minute, integration for them was the issue of, can I get the power to where they want to charge it? It's like, that's integration, that's service. Utilities generally are not paying attention to this or don't want to pay attention to this. And that was what I just said, kind of, is that, you know, everybody out there is basically buying who could be part of the grid.
Is Oncor paying a big attention to this also? Are you saying, with Toyota, is this just a little playing around with it, or are they serious about it?
Where we're serious about it is reverse power flow in general. Reverse power flow does think, again, we got those hundreds of thousands of transformers out there at distribution level. Heaven forbid this ever trickles up to impact substations where a whole feeder wants to go backwards onto the ERCOT grid. Chaos at that point. Down at the distribution level, though, the other hundreds of thousands of transformers, they are optimized to deal with inrush and fluctuations induced by a typical load, be that a commercial load, be that a residential load. They don't like reverse flow, not because there's fundamentally, if I build the transformer and you look at it electrically, it shouldn't know or care which direction is being energized. It's just passive coils that do this electromagnetic mumbo jumbo. But the way we actually build them protects and isolates and damps the circuit in such a way that we're not influenced by irregularities on the load side for what we're trying to keep constant on the primary side. Reverse flow blows that out of the water. Everything looks twice as big. Fault current becomes a joke. You know, when there's real faults, they're much larger than they are. They dampen other faults that we can't see as quickly, or if we do see, we're gonna get false negatives on, or false positives, excuse me, on our standard transfer trip detection and system protection. So the good news is I've been able to get attention to this because I've been able to point out that it has an impact on stuff that our power engineers care about. And the two will actually be, the company is not that stupid. We really do care about the whole thing, but it's just difficult to draw. Nobody's gonna listen to me on this one. Yeah, as much as I think it needs to be listened to. And, you know, we're not driving the train, we're just a cog in the wheel.
How about ERCOT trying to figure out whether the distributed things are generators or something else, or Oncor, or what are these distributed things, and arguing about it, they having big fights about it, is that over, or are they come to any
Oh,
solution?
no, it's not over. It's not over at all. Matter of fact,
Are they generators?
I don't know where the generators stand on it, but in terms of are we actually in a deregulated market or are we in a capacity market? That Pandora's box, the new, what's it called, the reserve market. You know, at least we're not overtly paying under a misnamed thing, a couple of $1 billion a year that we were paying for reserve capacity that was just an emergency fund. Now it's actually part of the way we're going to manage the market, but it's not clear what it's going to do on the capacity, the demand-based market that was the traditional contracted day ahead and spot markets. We're fundamentally wounded in the new program. So no, it's not. So this next one, wow, that changed fast. This one, no.
No.
Okay, good. I guess I'd be scared if that one wasn't changing fast. Yeah. And again, you gotta realize Texas is in some ways able to do more than certain states because of its deregulated structure and its anti-regulatory environment. In other ways, it's put itself in a corner and can only do certain things. You know, we're not all in Austin Energy where we can all get at the table and have, you know, housing and urban development discussed with the school system, discussed with the energy system, discussed with the generation system, what you want to do to get an end effect. We're the wires group, we make money one way. Then there's the generators, they make money another way. Then there's ERCOT, which only has certain authority to do things another way. So bottom line is, you know, we see, you know, and this one's specific to the transmission and delivery component of it. So there's other bigger winds blowing out there in terms of, you know, where does energy come from? Unlike the last 100 years of what we've been used to, all we have to do is match real-time energy and look at the pathological case and build a system that's able to take that sunny springtime transfer trip versus the peak demand in August and build out the system and say we can handle both. But now you've got more assets that could potentially play in different manners. You know, there's a hospital that came to us and they were like, well, okay, we're gonna do this for a microgrid on site. We've got this contract with a third party. They're providing the solution and well, we want you to do this with a dual feed. And, you know, we looked at it and said, okay, well, we understand that you might have 6 or 7 megawatts on site, but our grid, although it can handle that 6 to 7 megawatts, because obviously we're giving it to you most of the time. There were certain times of the year that if we didn't know they were running and other conditions were present on the grid, it would have violated our protection schemes. And so we told them, but you can only export it as that. It's like, oh, and or you can pay this much money to build our infrastructure up and get it to where we don't run into that condition. We didn't allow the answer that said, can we ask you permission when to run it at 6 megawatts?
Just communication. Is that not allowed?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's not. We are not,
What do you
we
see?
are not a market participant. We are not allowed to incent or enable any one part of the market.
Even to help protect the equipment from burning up.
Well, we did that. We told them they can't export it more than that.
Well, no. But that's a dumb way to do it.
I didn't say that.
When they- when they go to the rules, that issue-
Please tell me I didn't say
So
that.
you didn't say that.
It's not an opinion.
So you're saying you're gonna build it out up here, even that with their capability, you really only need this much, but you're gonna build it here because it's safe under all conditions. No knowledge is required of what they're doing. You're safe under all possible conditions.
There's 40 different cases of exactly that in this block. And you know, I mean, I've been sliding into this, big dumb utility talk or system, and it really isn't, it isn't like we're all choosing to be dumb out there. I have a hard time before I went to work for Oncor, which was only late in my career. You know, you walk up to the wall, you plug in, it's kind of like, how difficult could it be behind there to make that thing work? And it's sort of like, you know, your bill comes in, you don't really think about, oh, it's summer, it's ugly, you know, gosh, I should be looking at a new air conditioner. That's about as much thought as I gave my role as a participant in this ecosystem. And it's really, really hard to go to the public and start getting them hot and bothered about thinking about capacity versus consumption, or about different types of efficiencies, or, oh, wait, you can still do this, but I'm gonna make you pay for it if you do it that way. But if you do it this other way, it might cost you a little bit more, but look at all the other benefits. It's kind of like, you know, moving that value stack around between swim lanes is sort of like, I have a hard time thinking about that, and I'm in the industry. You know, how do you get a public groundswell other than, you know, turning the streets on fire to look at these sorts of issues? And even from a utility perspective, it's kind of like I said, we're one cog in the wheel. We either are specifically precluded from certain solution portions, or we just don't have the incentive across the whole company ethos for others. I think that could be. Oh, I knew I had this out here somewhere. I thought it was on one of the earlier ones. This is almost like my fun facts. I don't know why I put that on there as a get out of jail or get off the stage or whatever it is, but it really is just sort of things of examples of little point things that could change that have an impact. We talked earlier about the report that just came out about the upstream cost of methane containment, and that it was fairly low, but oh, by the way, nobody's telling anybody in the industry that they have to do. You know, the Bitcoin mining was on here. 2% of US electrical consumption. In Texas, it's 4% and rising quickly. The fact that infrastructure is being paid for by rate base overall, they don't, you know, we have an obligation to serve. If you come in and say, for 3 years or longer, I will use this electricity if you bring it to me, we put it in at our expense. You can tell me it's in the middle of an island and it's too far away, or you want dual feed and resilience and this, that. You can do some things to make it cost, but just because you're a Bitcoin factory and you ask for it, if you ask for it, it gets paid for, all of us pay for it. It comes out of rate base. Under what's called our line extension policy. Again, there are ways that you can get outside of line extension policy, but our obligation serves as everybody pays for it, it's rate based. Are those going to be stranded assets? If they are, that money that we all agree that we're going to pay are sitting out there is that much iron in the ground, not doing the job 7 years from now. Agriculture, it's an amazing consumer of electricity and huge carbon release. You hear about that. I've made it this far without getting into my opinions about the hydrogen. The hydrogen economy is a future, yes. The hydrogen hype as a place to invest your money today, 9 out of 10 people are gonna lose their shirt. It is not gonna happen as fast as everybody hopes it's gonna happen. You just can't build a hydrogen distribution infrastructure, nor can you make the hydrogen cheaply enough, efficiently enough now to use it in all places. But they talk about the fact that there is a huge hydrogen economy out there. Nobody mentions that only about 5% of it is fuel. 90% of it's in agriculture. The other 5% is in all sorts of other industrial uses, and you kind of get this tiny little bit of fuel.
Basically fertilizer.
Yes, yeah, it's almost all. Oh, but by the way, if you go out and you look at the industry records, you have to dig, when they talk about the BTUs that the industry uses, they don't mention the amount that went into fertilizer. So there's another 500 million BTUs, or no, half a quadrillion, yeah, BTUs, that's the fertilizer that they don't talk about when they talk about what's happening with the tractors in the water and the shipping and the plants and this, that, and the rest of it.
So it's really 1.4
Yeah.
quadrillion.
Yeah.
That's only 4% of the US energy.
And it is, now that's the thing, is it is only a small amount of our energy overall. And we have made amazing increases in efficiency per acre and per BTU, but it's still a huge energy source.
You're electric, right?
I'm what?
You're an electric guy.
Sometimes.
That's just a start.
Today, you weren't here at the beginning where I said, I'm not here representing Oncor or the Texas Parks and Wildlife, but I'm affiliated with both.
Your word choice here is energy.
Yes.
You're talking not electricity. What's the split when you're saying agriculture? See, some is electricity, your thing, and a whole bunch.
Most of this is not electricity.
Okay.
Some of it is, yes, and earlier on, if you went back to the Sankey diagrams, you would see that almost all of it that goes into agriculture is not electrical. There is one small feed that comes down of electrical that does go into, so it's on an earlier slide, but it is by far, it isn't even double-digit percentages.
Look ahead for electricity. Right, to agriculture. From
Are you gonna talk about the urban farming? Is that what
That's
we're talking
a
about?
minor subset.
Well, it depends. I mean, you could do that on a pretty large scale.
I understood, Gary. I meant, but reduced to practice. Like right now, you're feeding a bunch of irrigation plants.
Yeah,
Electric.
no.
So that is.
Right. And there are a lot of practices, when you look at what's been going on with the way that they water and the way that they pump, not everywhere. But there have been a lot of changes in what they are doing with electric vehicles in the farming industry. My boss just got invited with a couple of other industry players to go out to Caterpillar? Somebody who showed all their big farming and mining electrification, and these are all autonomous and GPS and radar operated, and it's crazy stuff going on. But that's a relatively small part of it. It's mostly from electrical perspectives. Probably, I guess you've got refrigeration is maybe big. I'm not sure. Transportation is a piece of it. Pumping, water supply. I'm not sure what else could be electrified in their industry.
How much of that, given amount of quote unquote energy, can you switch to electric? You see within your vision. If that's a pie, how much of that pie can be yours? I'm thinking all.
Well, think about it. It depends on, I mean, if you had tons of excess electricity. So, and this goes back to the Rethink X report. What happens if you make energy not your limiting factor? In which case, I can turn water into hydrogen. I
And
can.
hydrogen into an H3.
Exactly. Yes, yeah, so, yes, air and water, and I now have.
There's a guy that's got a package in Canada, $5 million. You know, a wind generator, we could and a well, you
Yeah.
gotta have water. You can start generating.
So,
energy.
so there are big pieces of this, I really haven't focused on the agriculture.
I don't know, it's always a good answer.
No, but I think you've got. If you've got a whole bunch of electricity, you've got water too. You could go either direction. You could make water or you could turn water into hydrogen.
Or pull it out of the air.
So
That's what I was thinking,
So we're
yeah.
gonna do an Iceland, right? They make a rule.
Yeah, so no, there are probably big pieces of this that could be an electrification type of future. And the thing is that, from an electrification future perspective, I'm looking at it from what they've taught me over the last, I've only been in the company 5-6 years. And I've only been in the utility industry with this company. And it's kind of like, well, the hammer, looks like the solution you're gonna do.
Why we spend all horsepower.
But to the point, there's, there are, even if I stay with electricity, you've got, well, are there fuel cells, and are they hydrogen fuel cells, or are they methane fuel cells? It doesn't have to be the utility necessarily providing that, if you can do it at your house. And now it's kind of like, how many people here, this is just a fun one, not a fun fact. Who here has ever been in a house that's had milk delivered by the milkman?
Long time ago.
Milk delivered to your house by the milkman.
Yeah. Exactly. More case of age.
Can you
We just
imagine,
carried it down from the dairy hole.
can you imagine if the milkman that came to your house was either dropping off or picking up bottles of ammonia or some very high density electrical storage that, you got some quanta at every house, some energy cube, and maybe it's ammonia, maybe it's hydrogen, maybe it's something you did with some ultra capacitor that, is just dumping off of your 40% efficiency. solar roof. Well, that's what I'm saying, is I don't know that the future,
Oh,
you can
it's
think about it.
distributed.
I don't know that it's just electrification of the consuming type, which is kind of the way we were talking about it. Is there a different way to pump the water, or a different way to make the hydrogen? I also don't know that it goes through wires. And Lisa brought up earlier the wireless transmission. I forget how you got out. Oh yeah, the density of the downlink being no more than solar. It's like, I think that's called the sun.
Well, there actually isn't some projects now.
Don't give me anesthetic waves.
No, with the satellite.
Oh, yes, no, well, I track all of them.
Exactly.
That's one of the 20 or 30 disruptors that my little team, a half a dozen of us watch. I own the wireless transmission. And by the way, it's already in practice at distribution levels for short spans. So there are some companies that it costs a little bit more, but instead of having to put a long span over a piece of water, you just bring these, and they're not really huge. It's a couple of, it's less than 10 square meters that you can actually put a 12 kV line across a piece of water with wireless today. Yeah.
You stand between them and use your phone.
You don't want to be standing in the beam, no. let alone using your phone.
Right. That looks like more of a wealth if you're standing on a pavement.
Hey, I really enjoyed, and so this was just kind of, I picked on cement, they're less than 1%, but again, this is the type of industry that they are out there looking at. They've got ways of doing kilns other than the standard kilns and different mixes and stuff we've been building since the Romans taught us how, that will build cement at much higher energy efficiencies. I mentioned one other thing, and again, why was it you mentioned it in terms of the waste that we throw around, the waste energy. If we ever get past the carbon impact and figure out how to both either incent by either restrictions or incentives a change in our behavior with regard to greenhouse gases, that would be the next one, because it's the same problem. It's, you know, we haven't, we're, you know, a billion here, billion there of us with whatever we want to do for our million BTUs a day. Well, thank goodness the rest of the world is not doing what we do with that.
But if we get away from the carbon problem, does that mean we stop burning things?
No,
Or you just say you're capturing the carbon that's somehow.
Yeah. Oh, don't even get me on CCUS.
No, I'm just saying.
If I hate anything more than the hype around hydrogen, it's the hype around CCUS.
Well, but I mean, I'm just saying that the carbon-based issues are coal and natural gas that you burn.
You do remedy large pieces of it. You will still be generating heat and a lot of other wasteful practices. It is almost as harmful, but we haven't focused on that.
These are generating heat. Maybe not very much, but heat. The air conditioning system is having to remove that heat to the outside of the building, where it's then ejecting the heat outside, creating a heat island.
Right.
So, yeah.
The water heater is currently cooling by basically emission of the 60.
I'm not saying, I'm saying proper management of heat is a good thing. Heat in itself is not bad. Waste heat is bad.
Yeah, every morning.
We will release you.
Thank you, Randy. It was a very engaging and interesting presentation. As a matter of fact, I don't think we really finished it all the way. Would it be possible for you to come back at some point in the future and let's maybe focus on?
You could pick a piece.
Yes,
It
right.
could be like on renewable energy.
Yeah, energy
I don't
efficiency
know.
or both. Those two things would be great. If you could come back and talk to us about those two things, that'd be wonderful.
Or V2G, now you just got one mouthful last time. Certainly soon, we will be ready to release some of the public data of why we're involved with Toyota, the results that we're seeing, and maybe a specific briefing on that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different places. I mean, my gosh, you don't have to take 2 steps to get more information on transportation electrification nowadays. But if you want me to come in and talk to that, I'm ready on that too.
Perfect.
Because,
Yes, we
Ryan,
do.
Something mostly about the financial side of it, the financial
Okay.
benefits. We wasn't talking about the grid and user benefits.
There's so much fun stuff going on out there. The reason that the CHAdeMO standard was the first one to certify for bidirectional, as opposed to what was then the only CCS, which was European. How did we end up with, if they invented it first in Europe, how did we have CCS 1 and they have CCS 2? I'm not sure about that. But it was all a result of Fukushima. Was the reason that they went down that path, and they actually, so again, from those OEMs, they're certifying that there's no impact on your warranty and the life cycle of your system. Think about it. When I'm going down the road, the demand that I'm making when I ask for acceleration on that battery is hundreds of kW, as opposed to the export, which currently, just by convention, not by actual standard, is limited to 10 kW. I think we're going to see with CCS 1 being certified as an actual bidirectional standard, possibly by late this year and no later this next year. We're also going to hear the export limits probably coming up from by OEM will increase to, probably at least double. So 20 kW, something like that. In which case, now you're talking about a house that doesn't look anything like the house we designed our system to support. Something that can export quickly 20 kW from every household is just sort of like, well, no, we did not build that distribution system. Yeah, which is why we're interested.
Well, again, thank you, Randy. Very much appreciate this and very interesting. And with that, I will close the general meeting. Thank you all of y'all for coming today. And I think it was worthwhile for this presentation. And again, maybe a few months from now, we'll get you back here, Randy, to talk about a few other things. But thank y'all for coming and see y'all next month.
So next month, the, let me get a mic. Next month, the plan is to have the city of Irving, their environmental office. The city of Irving talking about these kind of things, Randy. Did you know the city of Irving is installing this month supposedly in their South Library, the first DC charger at a public, I think at a city-owned facility in the state of Texas, or at least a library. That's what they think. They've got a Department of Energy grant, and it's a DC charger. So we may, I'm going to investigate and see, we might move the meeting to that location next month, or we might meet here. Depends on whether I can get us in there at the library. It's like other library problems. Getting in before 10 o'clock on Saturday morning may be a little difficult, but I'm going to work on it. And so we may move to the Irving South Library in downtown Irving next month for our meeting. But I thought that was an interesting topic with them getting that DC charger in. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no, well, I just want to note in here.
Okay.
Here's our